let me tell you a story I know, all about trains and where they go, all about trains and what they do, all about trains.
Welcome to our program. Trains, just like any other mode of transportation, have to get from one point to the other. Trains do it on the rail. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to lay track. Behind me is the A&LM Railroad, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Missouri. They're on their way this morning to Bastrop, Louisiana, and then on to Crossett, Arkansas. Get an idea of how the motion of the train goes along the rail, because we are going to talk about laying track today on All About Trains. Noisy train, wasn't it? With me today is the Vice President of the Arkansas and Louisiana Missouri Railroad, Mr. Herman Wilson. Herman, I wonder if you could give us a basic overview of what it takes to lay track in the real world.
Well, to start at the beginning with a piece of track, I guess you start with a right-of-way. The right-of-way is a property purchased or acquired on which to build the track. It usually includes enough extra property to borrow dirt from to build a roadbed or dump. The dump is the most important part of a railroad track. The track is only as good as the foundation upon which it's built. After you get your subgrade graded down, then it's time to start building the track. To build the track, first you put your cross ties down, properly position them and space them. The spacing usually runs from 19-21 inches in main track and 24 inches in side track. After the ties are spaced, then you apply the plates to the ties that are fit between the tie and the rail to cut down on mechanical wear. Then the rail is spiked to the ties. This rail, the first rail you apply, is called the line rail. It's the rail you use to align your track to keep it straight or in proper curve. Then the other rail is positioned on plates on the other side and gauged to the line rail with an instrument called, appropriately enough, a gauge, to ensure a 4-foot 8.5-inch gauge, which is a standard gauge in the United States. After the track is all gauged up, all the rails are bolted together, all the ties are spiked up, then you're ready for the ballast. Dump the ballast in the track, jack the track up, tamp the ballast under the ties to hold it in surface. Then after that's completed, then you use a machine called a ballast regulator to come back and dress your track, regulate the ballast, and sweep all the excess ballast off the top of the ties. Then you're ready for the train.
Oh, that's it? And then go ahead and run the train along top of it.
Right.
Well, there's an example of how we do it in the real world. Let's apply that to the model world. Now that we've seen how prototype rail is laid down, let's take a look at how it's working in the model world. We're here today with Dave Beidel. Dave, what have you got here?
Chuck, I brought along 3 models of an EMDF-7 diesel unit to show the difference in scale. This is an O-scale model. It's approximately 1 to 48. That means 1 inch on this model is equal to 48 inches on the real thing, called the prototype. This is an HO scale model of the same type of engine. It's 1 to 87 in proportion. It's also approximately half of O-scale in size. And this is an N-scale model. It's 1 to 160 in proportion. Scale is the difference in size of the model as compared to the real thing, the prototype. Gauge, over here, we'll talk about gauge. This is a standard gauge locomotive. This locomotive is sitting on what is known as the North American standard gauge, 4 foot, 8.5 inches between the heads of the rail. Okay, this is also an HO scale model of a 3-foot narrow gauge. That means it's 3 feet between the rail heads. You can see the difference in size of the 2 engines and the 2 trains. The narrow gauge was laid because it was cheap, quick, and easy to lay, where the standard gauge was laid to move more freight more rapidly.
I see you've got a couple of pieces of rail over there on the table. What are they for?
Okay, Chuck. This piece of rail is from the Kansas City Southern Railroad. I wanted to show what rail is made of. It's made of 3 basic pieces. You have the head of the rail, where the trains roll on. You have the web of the rail that connects the head to the base of the rail. The base of the rail is tapered to allow a track spike to push down against it and hold the rail in place, like so. Rail is measured in pounds per yard, prototype rail. This is approximately a 100-pound rail. That means it weighs 100 pounds per yard of this rail. In comparison, this piece of rail is a 25-pound rail. Came from the Rio Grande Southern. It weighs 25 pounds per yard. Model rail is measured not in pounds per yard, but in height. Let's take a look at some model rail.
Okay, let's get some of this cleaned off here so we can use some of the rest of it.
I have 3 pieces of rail here to show some variety. This piece of rail is code 100. It is measured in hundredths of an inch, or thousandths of an inch. 100 thousandths of an inch is equal to code 100. 70 thousandths of an inch is code 70, and 55 thousandths of an inch is code 55. Code 100 rail is equivalent to approximately 152-pound rail on the real thing. There was only one railroad that used rail that heavy, and that was the Pennsylvania Railroad. Code 70 rail is more equivalent to the 100-pound rail that we saw a little bit ago. It's not quite, but close to it. Code 55 would be something that would be used in a small branch line. It's heavier than the code 20, than the 20-pound rail we saw, 25-pound rail we saw, but it would be used in a lighter branch line. Chuck, let's look at the different types of model rail. We have here some sectional track. That's exactly what it means. It comes in 9-inch sections. It's a standard length. It comes in a standard curvature, standard radius.
I don't understand what they mean when they say radius.
Okay, radius is nothing more than a way of expressing the degree of curvature of the track. An 18-inch radius curve is a very sharp curve. A 36-inch radius curve is a very broad curve.
Okay, what if I want a curve that's not going to fit into either one of those?
Well, that's our next step up. That's flex track. Flexible track. You can take this flexible track, which comes in 3-foot lengths, and bend it to whatever curvature you need, or lay it straight as you see necessary. And it can run anywhere you want it to. There's got less rail joints in this. In other words, the piece is longer, so you have a better electrical contact, and a smoother run. And once again, you can put it any way you want to put it. Another type of rail is the individual rail. This you have to roll your own. You have to lay your own track with individual ties and individual spikes.
But that's pretty difficult, though, isn't it?
Not really. I'll be glad to show you how.
Okay. Good, well, then we're ready to go.
No, we're not. There's several things we need to discuss first.
Like what?
We need to discuss the size of your space. You need to know how large an area you have to put a model railroad. Do you have a large basement room? Do you have a small closet that you need to put it in? We also need to discuss the location along with that. Where are you going to put it? Are you going to put it in the back bedroom? Are you going to put it in the middle of the room? Do you want it over in a corner? Do you have a whole room to devote to it? And then we need to talk about the theme. The theme of the railroad being basically the era it runs in, whether it's a heavy mainline railroad or is it a small little branch line logging railroad, a big industrial road, or just a little tourist railroad.
Well, assuming that I've already got all that figured out, I know what my theme is, I know the era that I'm going to model, I've got my small layout on a table in the middle of the room. Now can we lay track?
No, let's talk about the benchwork a little bit.
Benchwork, what's benchwork?
Benchwork is anything you use to support your railroad. There are 3 types of benchwork. There's the flat top, the open grid, and the L-girder. The flat top is nothing more than a desktop or a tabletop that's built on legs. The open grid is a series of boxes. It provides a sturdier support and allows you to run scenery easier. It's an open type system. The L-girder is a type of benchwork that's made with wood put together in the shape of an L that gives you very strong support and very light weight. Then there are modifications of each type that you can do. You're not locked into any one particular type. You can use any one with any other. I've got 3 different types on mine, and there's no problem at all, as long as you build it sturdily.
Okay, David, now that we've got the benchwork figured out, let's lay some track.
Not quite yet, Chuck. We've got benchwork. That is the sub-road bed. Now we need to talk about road bed. There are different types of road bed on the market, some commercially available. This is a piece of foam road bed. This is a piece of cork road bed. This comes in 3 feet lengths, and it's splittable. You take it apart, and you lay it side by side, and form your own shape of the road bed you want. There are several other types of road beds available. I prefer to use one of the home insulation boards like Upson board or Homosote, and I shape my own roadbed from that. Those come in 4 by 8 foot sheets, and it's very economical.
So you carved this one out then?
Well, you have to cut it, yes. You have to cut it with a saw, a saber saw, a regular hand saw, a coping saw. Now, let's assume that we have our sub-road bed, our benchwork built.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to simulate that this piece of wood is our sub-road bed. Let's go ahead and lay some road bed.
Okay.
Okay? Need a little white glue. You get to play with it with your finger. And just kind of smear it on.
This is the fun part of model railroading.
Oh, this is fun, yes. You get to get as dirty as you want. And you're big enough that your mommy doesn't care too much. And then you simply put your roadbed in place on the glue and let it dry. The roadbed, besides shaping your base for your track, is also a sound deadener. It cuts the noise level down you get from the trains as they roll by. And it's rather interchangeable, as you can see. Now that's glued in place. When that dries, we've got a section of roadbed.
Okay, now I can lay track, right?
Now we can lay some track. Let's start off with a little bit of sectional track. A piece of sectional track here. And I want to join these pieces together. We have a little rail joiner that slides on the end of the track. And you slip the two together. We come along with little track nails. They're simply like a small tack. Tack it in place. And simply continue on down your line. When you're done, you want to sight down your track and make sure that it's straight.
Okay.
You don't want any kinks in the track. If you're laying a curve, you want to make sure that the curve is smooth transition to it. Then you come along and check your track.
What's that?
This is the National Model Railroad Association standards gauge. Each piece on here means a certain specific thing, Chuck. Down here in the bottom, you've got a couple protrusions. Those are the measurement of your gauge, the gauge of your rails, the distance between the track. If you take this one on this side and snug it up against the head of one rail and gently try to rock the other side in, if it falls in all the way up to this notch, your gauge is too wide. If this other piece doesn't rock in at all, your gauge is too narrow. This notch here is a platform clearance gauge. That's talking about a loading dock or a train platform at a station, that type of thing. These two notches here are to check your wheel back-to-back distance. Your flanges from your wheels fit in these two notches. This notch here is to check wheel width. If a wheel falls loosely inside there, it's too small. If your wheel will not fit in there at all, it's too large. The entire outer section of the gauge is a clearance gauge for bridges, tunnels, etc. Nothing should come closer to the track than that. These nubs up at the top that protrude are your flangeway gauge. This we'll get into when we talk about handling track turnouts.
So now can we lay some track?
Now we can lay some track.
Okay, good.
I've got some roadbed prepared here. First, we need to lay some ties.
Okay. See, this is the fun part. This is the part that always fascinates me the most, putting it down. How come the ties are different colors?
I've got different colored ties. I pre-stained them so that after we get them glued down and we come back to color our actual color in, that there'll be some variation. You don't want every tie to be the same because the real railroads laid them at different times of the lifespan. And the weather affects it. Okay, we've got our glue in place. Now we come along and just start laying some ties in.
Now, does it matter at all the length apart between each tie? Are you again just simulating prototype?
A small light branch line tends to have the ties spaced further apart than a heavy-duty main line does. Kind of, it's a thing of aesthetics. What pleases you is what you want to do. Just like anything with model railroad. It's what pleases you.
What are the ties made of? Are they pre-cut?
These happen to be pre-cut. They're made out of a very fine-grained wood, and they're fairly close in dimensions to the real thing.
hand-laying track doesn't look as hard as I thought it was going to be.
It's not. It's a little time-consuming, but it's a lot of fun. You get to do whatever you want to do. You're the track gang.
I never thought of it like that. I'm so used to just buying them in the 3-foot sections and putting it down that I never think about this.
You know, I got into track laying. I started off, when I first started track laying, not because I wanted something else to do, but because I had a very limited budget. And it is cheaper to lay your own track than it is if you go out and buy the prefab stuff.
Really?
Yes, it is. And then again, I get more hobby hours of enjoyment out of my own hand-laid track. It's not hard. You basically, on your straight track, you want to make sure you maintain a fairly straight alignment with the ties. If you are laying, like I say, heavy-duty mainline, space them a little closer, about a tie and a half space from the next tie. Okay, we'll say we got the ties pretty much laid out. Next thing we want to do is we want to come along after the glue dries and sand the tops of the ties lightly. That's to make sure they're a uniform height. Otherwise, your track's going to be humps, and it doesn't make for very good operation of your train. After you've done that, you'll still have some color variation in your ties because the stain is soaked into your wood. But we need to color the rest of the ties. I've got some stuff I call tie goop. It's simply a mixture of, this is black shoe polish, liquid shoe polish, mixed with alcohol. Just plain old everyday rubbing alcohol.
Of course, normally now we'd wait for the glue to dry.
Normally the glue would be drying, and you can lay it, you can mix it to any strength you want if you want darker looking ties or lighter looking ties, whatever.
I see what you mean about the different colors in the ties then. It does make a difference.
It does make a difference, and if you don't think it's dark enough after you've made one application, you just come back after it's dried and restain it. Okay, after you've got your stain in place, a lot of people like to go ahead and lay their rail. I prefer to go ahead and put my ballast on.
Okay.
It's easier to me to ballast before the rails are in place, so I don't have to ballast around them.
Is that just a personal preference?
It's a personal preference of mine. It's very handy to do it now. What I've got here is I've got some white glue, like we used to glue the ties down, some Elmer's glue or some type of glue like that. It's been thinned down with water. Oh, I usually use about a 3-to-1, roughly 3-to-1. It doesn't matter too much, as long as it's enough that it doesn't run off too fast. It'll hold the ballast in place that we want to put on it. I'm ballasting the sides of this. I'm putting glue on here and ballasting the sides of this road bed first. I'm sure we're going to get some on the top. But it's plain and simple. Just pour some ballast on. Any excess you can save up and use later. You just sweep it up and save it. Now that we've got the ballast in place over the tops, we come along with any flat object we've got and even it off.
Why is this ballast so small? It looks so tiny.
Well, this ballast is pretty close to scale ballast. This ballast represents about a 2 to 3 inch diameter piece of material, chunk of material.
Oh, that
in
is.
HO scale.
It's like a grain of sand.
Now, there's a lot of ballast you see on the commercial market is overscale.
See, that's what I mean, because I've never used anything anywhere near this small on my layout at all.
Well, that's no big problem. A lot of times your overscale ballast will actually look better on the track from a visual standpoint, a person just standing around looking at the thing. It'll look better than the scale ballast sometimes. It brings out the contrast, the texture, where this looks very fine. It almost looks like sand, and you get the idea of sand. Okay, we can go ahead and lay some rail now. I've prepared another section that already has the ballast in place throughout. Let's review first. We have our road bed. We've glued our ties down. We stained our ties, sanded and stained our ties, and then we ballasted.
Okay.
Okay?
Let me clean the top of the table a little bit here.
Okay.
Get some of this out of the way. Okay.
Here's our prepared section.
That looks more prototypical than when you buy it. I guess that's the idea, isn't it?
That's the idea of handling your own. First, we're going to take one rail and some spikes and spike it in place. These spikes are really miniature spikes like the Rio Railroad uses.
Just sort of line of sight, huh?
Now, I'm kind of used to where to position the rail, so somebody that is a little more inexperienced than I am may prefer to use a 3-point gauge to line up your piece of rail. You can take this, you lay it on the track, and you can center your pieces of rail. You know that the end of this comes to the end of the ties. So you start your first piece of rail in place. And we're going to spike about every 6th tie, 5th or 6th tie, all the way down. We could spike every tie, but then it's really
time-consuming.
It's time-consuming, and it's not really necessary for good operation and to hold the track in place.
Well, is it a good idea to put a spike opposite each other then on both sides?
Yes, this allows for adjustments later on, too. If you start putting one spike on one side of one tie and then go down to another tie, you can end up with a zigzag pattern very easily. And once again, you need to sight down your rail. Just look down your rail to see if you're going straight as you go. This is my favorite pair of pliers. Everybody has a favorite spike driving tool.
You said spike driving tool. Does that mean that there are spike driving tools that people can buy for that?
Yes, there are. There are some that are made just for that. Most people that I have known that have laid their own rail, though, have used some type of a needle nose plier.
How did you learn all of this over the time? Did you compare notes with other people, or?
I read a lot of books, and I got interested in doing it. And I was somewhat leery of it till one day I decided to go down to the local hobby shop and get some stuff to do it. I bought a couple lengths of rail and a package of pre-cut ties and some very overscale ballast. The ballast I used was probably overscale for an O-gauge layout. And same thing with the spikes. I didn't know too much, and I bought spikes that were actually O-scale spikes. But I proceeded to lay a test section of rail on an old bed slat. Something laying around that I wanted to use. I put some cork road bed down and glued the ties down and stained them brown and just started in. I just went with what I had read.
Can we put a piece down on the other side and show them a few ideas? Because I think we're getting ready to wrap up our segment here.
Okay. We would have continued spiking all the way down on that side. Now we need the 3-point gauges.
Okay.
The 3-point gauge is nothing but a holding fixture to hold the rail roughly spaced out where it belongs. We'll come back later and check it with the standards gauge, the NMRA standards gauge that we used earlier.
Okay, Dave, let's summarize what we've done. We've got a piece of work that we've already finished up here a little bit. And why don't you tell the audience exactly what we've got here?
We've laid our road bed. We've come along, put our ties on, sanded, stained our ties, laid our ballast. We've laid our individual rails. And in this case, we've gone ahead and put a little color in there to show the age of the thing. It's not brand new. It's not laying on top of the ballast. It's all part of the scene.
You weathered it then?
Yes, I weathered it.
What did you use to weather it with?
I used an airbrush and model railroad paint. You could just as easily use a paintbrush with a thin mixture to stain it.
So there you have it. We've taken you from laying down the first pieces of track, first by planning what you want to do. Then we've gone and showed you how to choose sub-road beds, the type of track you want to use. We've shown you how to hand lay tracks, how to apply ballast. Next week, we're going to show you how to put down switches. Have fun.
To ensure that the wheels don't go down the wrong way, you have a guardrail on each side, and that holds the wheels over against the outside rail to be sure that the wheel on the inside follows the proper flange wheel on the frog. That's basically all there is to a turnout: the switch, the guardrail, and the frog.
Herman, when I've gone to the hobby shop to pick up switches, one of the things that the person in the shop has mentioned to me before is a stock rail, but I'm not really quite sure just what that is.
Chuck, the stock rail is this rail that turns out to the side track part of a switch and stock or bent just before you get to the switch point, about 8 inches, in order to assure that this switch point fits up tight against the rail. The stock or bend in it gets its name from the stock or bend in a shotgun stock.
That's basically the operation of a switch. Let's take all of this now and see if we can apply it to our layouts. With me today are two guests, Dave Beidel and Paul Harwell. You'll remember Dave from our last episode on laying track. This time Dave's going to show us the fundamentals of laying a switch. He'll even show us how to hand lay a switch. Later on in the episode, Paul Harwell is going to show us how to operate a switch, or as we refer to it, bending iron. First, I'd like to ask Dave, what's the difference between what we call a switch and a turnout?
Chuck, there's no difference really between a switch and a turnout. Modelers have historically called a track switch a turnout in order to differentiate between that, the one that switches tracks, which is a train on a track, and an electrical switch that they use in their track wiring. The parts of the switch in the model are the same as in the prototype. You have a stock rail on each side, you have a frog, you have the wing rails, you have the closure rails, and the points that actually do the moving. I've prepared a surface here that simulates the roadbed, and we're going to take this commercial switch, and I'm going to show you how to lay this switch as if it were on your layout. First thing you do is you lay it down and make sure the end of your rails here are going to line up with your other track. There are two different basic ways to lay these kind of turnouts, these general kind of turnouts. Some of them come with little holes in the center of the ties, and they're made for putting track nails in. Others come with little holes out by the edge of the tie that are made for putting a little track spike in. You spike it down. I usually start in the center. Then I do the two ends. Making sure, once again, that everything lines up. And when I'm happy with my alignment, I go ahead and put spikes in all the rest of the little holes that they have for the spikes.
You'd go ahead and run a car or something through to make sure, and that would be all you'd need?
No, you'd use a track gauge. The NMRA standards gauge is used to check your track, your straight track, your curved track, and your switches. You need a gauge to check to make sure the rails are not too spread or too narrow, or that make sure your wheels are going to roll through a switch. First, we're going to check our point area. We're going to rock the track gauge in and make sure that it's not too close. Your point area you want pretty close to maximum width on your gauge. It'll give you a better rolling quality.
Does that mean that it should be snug a little bit then, or a little loose?
No, you want it close to as loose as possible without falling in between the rails. We're going to check all the way down, and we're going to check the diverging route also. Make sure nothing is too tight or too loose. And we're going to flip the gauge over, and we're going to use the little flangeway nubs. We're going to check our guardrails and our frog area to make sure we're not going to strike anything when we're rolling through. We can't have a wheel rolling down through the frog, and because the track is too wide a gauge, falling over, or because it's too narrow, striking the frog and taking the diverging route. Then you'd have a derailment. Once you're satisfied everything is in place, go ahead and roll your car through it. Run your engines through it.
Dave, that's all well and good, but I've got a couple of areas on my layout where a commercial switch will not fit. Now, what do I do about that?
Let me show you what we can do about that, Chuck. We'll take this commercial turnout, and you can take it and cut it with a razor saw or an X-Acto knife or something like that between every other tie on opposite sides of the rail. Now, what that does, in effect, is make this switch into a piece of flex track. And then you can carefully bend it to whatever shape you need without having to actually build a whole turnout.
Does it follow it all the way through then?
It flows right on through. You have to use your spikes to hold it over a little bit, but you can cut it and make it into a flex track turnout.
And I just come back
Or
with
as the commercial curvable turnouts are nowadays.
Well, then what do I do? Just come back with the gauge then like the others and make sure that it's...
Just check it the same way you'd do anything. I do not recommend cutting it between the ties around the point area or around the frog area, because those are critical areas. Now, the other way you can do it is you can hand lay your own rails and build your own switch.
Oh, that's pretty difficult, though.
It's time-consuming. It's not really that hard. There's two basic ways that I use to lay out a turnout. One way is to use a printed template, which has a specific frog angle. This is a number 5. You can get templates that are available number 4, number 6, and they show exactly where the ties go, exactly where the rail is going to go. Now, that to me is kind of the hard way. I would rather take and build a switch to fit a specific location, and however it lays is however it lays. If it works out to be about a number 10, it works out to be about a number 10. The way I draw the basic area is by using 2 old pieces of flex track. I take one and line it up with the straight track, or they could both be curved in opposite directions or the same direction. But I lay the first one down, and I bend the other one to the angle I need to line it up. And I take a pencil and I just draw along the edges of the ties. This will show me where my ties are supposed to end up. We've got the outline of a switch. Then I take wooden ties. These are switch ties. They're similar to what we used for regular track, but they're longer. And I glue them down. And when the glue dries, you can come along and trim them up with the edge of the lines you drew. And your little switch block of your ties is all set up. Now what I've done is I've prepared a rail base already with ties, ballast, and drew my lines first and everything in order to make it a little easier for us tonight. Before we get into that, though, before we actually lay any rail, I want to talk a little bit about some tools that we use.
Okay.
First, we have a pair of needle nose pliers. Everybody has their own favorite pair of needle nose pliers. Those are used for driving spikes. The weight, the way they fit your hand, it all depends on how you feel with that pair to see if that's your favorite pair or not. And your favorite pair is what you want to drive the spike with. Then we have another pair of pliers I use. These I use to cut the rail and to bend the rail if I'm making a large bend. We have assorted files that we use to trim down the rail, to smooth up the ends. We have a small straight edge, make sure the track through a straight port of a turnout is straight. We have a couple different types of gauges. We have the NMRA standards gauge, and then we have a couple 3-point gauges to hold the track in line while we spike it down. This is an abrasive block to use for cleaning the tops of the rails when you're done. I have a little container of spikes and, of course, ties.
Okay.
First thing we want to do is you want to set up your straight track or one of your stock rails. It doesn't have to be straight. If I've got a straight switch, I start with that. And you set it down, line it up where you want it to go, and down in this area you want to come down a tie past where the throw bar mechanism will be. This is where the throw bar goes. And you want to put a little mark there. We're going to file away the base of the rail in this area for about 2 inches up. File it down to a nice notch all the way up against here, but just the base. We don't want to file the head away. This is going to make a little receptacle for our point to fit into. Now, rather than physically do it to this, I've already got one prepared with this little notch filed in it to save a little time. I'm going to take and spike this rail in place. The critical part of this rail is right down here where the point notches in. You want to put a pair of spikes as close as you can to where the point will fit without going up into the area where the actual point will fit to stabilize your rail there. Then I usually come down the other end and kind of line it up by eye and put another pair of spikes in somewhere down at this end. Then you can use your straight edge if you want to line it up, make sure it's nice and straight. If you got a longer straight edge, it'll work a little better, and that's nice and straight. That'll do pretty good. Then we'll go back, and except for the area between where our notch is and about a dozen ties out, we're going to spike about every fourth tie all the way down.
Okay.
Now, we don't want to do it in here because the points have to fit in there, and we don't want any spikes on that side. We can use them on this side, on the outside, but not on the inside. Now we want to make the rail that goes on the diverging route, the other stock rail. I have one prepared here with the notch already cut out in it. And I'm going to come down at the end where the points go. I use my NMRA gauge and check to make sure I've got the rail within gauge before I spike it. And we'll check periodically as we go along to make sure that we maintain our gauge.
Wouldn't the 3-point gauge work just as well?
No, the 3-point gauge is not accurate. It's not a machined accuracy. We're going to use it to hold this rail in place right now while we put the other spikes in, but it is not accurate enough to do any measuring from. The NMRA gauge, you always come through and check after you're done with the NMRA gauge to make sure you got it the way you want it. At the point end, we want the gauge to be a little bit on the wide side. We want to get it about as wide as the gauge will allow before it drops in. It's a little different from what we'll use down at the frog end. The frog end we want right at minimum gauge. Now, this is our curved rail. We want to bend it on out so it forms a nice, smooth flowing curve here, and stab a couple spikes in here. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to make, a little frog rail. Okay, the frog is actually an angle that diverges. That's where the two pieces of rail would cross. So what we want to do is we want to take a piece of rail and file off one side of it to make half that angle, roughly.
Okay.
The sharper the curve you make, the less that you have to file to get the angle. Come along with your 3-point gauge to hold it in rough position. And just put a couple spikes in. That's good for there. Now we want to do the same thing for the other part. Okay, here's where we need the NMRA gauge. Both rails have to be gauged just perfectly from each side. If they're held apart, too far apart, we can slide them down. That's why we didn't force these spikes down yet.
Okay.
We can slide them to make them fit.
Now, are you just going to leave it sit, or can I come and attach something back here to hold these in place afterwards?
You can come along and solder that in.
But does it matter?
It's really a little better if you do.
Okay.
It'll hold it in place. You don't have to worry about it slipping.
Okay.
Electrically, it'll make a better continuity.
Ah, okay.
And it can fill your frog up to make it look more realistic. But you don't have to.
Okay. I just
You don't
wanted
have to.
I was curious about that.
If somebody's afraid of soldering, they really don't want to be building a switch anyway, because we've got some soldering to do down here on the points.
Okay.
This is just a matter of filling it a little bit with solder. Next, we want to put, we've got our frog and our stock rails. We need something to connect the two. We're going to build the point rail and the closure rail all in the same piece. What we're going to do is just come up here about 3 to 4 ties past the point of the frog. We're going to make a little bend in this rail like that can help catch a wheel and bring it in to roll in case it's reaching, close to the point of derailing. Just kind of, instead of hitting this thing, it'll grab it and pull it in. And we're going to hold this rail out here. we're going to slide our track gauge along until we contact that rail.
Okay.
We're going to mark that point. Okay? Keep an eye on the mark you made. We're going to bend it. Right at that point, we're going to put a little bend in it, and there's the makings of our point rail. It's going to connect right through there. Now, what we need to do is, using the gauge again, check to make sure we've got the point where it touches. Come down here to the very end of your notch and draw a little mark. That's where we're going to cut it. We're just going to snip through it and take a file and dress up the end so it's nice and smooth and not rough. The first thing you want to do is you want to take another file and remove the head of the rail only. This is the part where, the very top of the head is the part where the wheels roll on. But the head comes down a little ways, and it's the side of the head that you want to remove on the inside of that point. When I say the inside, the side that's towards the inside of the switch.
Okay.
Okay, we want to file it away about an inch. What this does is this gives us a smooth flow from the stock rail onto the points. Without doing this, you'd have a bump every time you hit, every time you came through the points.
Possible derailment then?
Sure. Bounce the wheels right on out.
I never thought of that.
Okay, we've done that. On the inside, we want to come up about roughly 2 inches, and we want to file away the whole side of the rail flat. We want to taper it. Taper it down to a fine point. That's why I call them points, because they taper down to a fine point. So this is what it'll look like when you're done.
Oh,
Okay?
it sure is.
We filed the head away over here, and on this side, it's just filed down to a point. And you take your piece and lay it in using your gauge and a couple spikes. Bring it down to where you're just going to touch it. Then spike your rail in place. Now we're going to spike this all the way from the throat, which is where we made this bend. This is called the throat of the frog. We're going to spike it about 4 to 6 ties down towards the end of the point. You want every tie spike to hold it in place. If we spike down to here, it's going to be hard to bend this, as opposed to spiking back to here. It bends nice and easily and smoothly. And that's exactly what throwing a switch is bending the iron. As the term, the rail was made out of iron, and they had to bend the iron to move the switch, to move through the switch. Let me review what we've done then, Chuck. We've determined where our ties and everything are going to go by either the template or by the center lines, or the lines we drew, the outside lines. We've laid our ties, and then here I stained them and ballasted. Come along and put the 2 stock rails in. Put half of a frog in, which becomes the stock rail for the next one in this case. Came in, put the other half of the frog in, laid one of the point rails, laid the other point rail, the guard rails, and the tie bar, and now we can throw the switch.
Well, are there other ways that I can throw this switch without having to use this manual type throw?
Ask Paul.
Okay, Paul, how do you throw a switch?
Well, Chuck, there are 2 basic ways of throwing a switch, or as they say, bending the iron. There are the manual or hand throw type switch machines here, or the automatic or electrical switch machines, which we have examples of both here. I've gone ahead and mounted a switch on the layout surface.
Now this is all plastic, right?
Yes, sir. We have this mounted on a plexiglass surface, so you can see it from the underside also. The simple procedure in a hand throw is, it is thrown by hand, of course. This is the lever that actuates the throwing. This is a vertical one. You just flip it over. There's also another style which mounts in the exact same way, rather than flipping it over vertically like this, it is a horizontal thing. You just twist it from side to side. As you can see, the throw bar mechanism moves as we turn this around. Okay, those are basically the hand throws. What I'd like to talk about now, Chuck, is the common off-the-shelf type electric switch machine that comes mounted on the switch itself. This is the standard 9-inch sectional track piece for a right-hand switch. This comes from Atlas, Tyco, all the different manufacturers make this. This has a electric motor here. This is actually mounted on the side of the ties of the switch. It is connected to the throw bar here, thus moving the points there. When you reverse the polarity of the switch machine, it throws it the other way. Now I'd like to show the differences in the electric switch machines, Chuck.
Okay.
This is the old standby. It's been around for a good while. It's very powerful. It's called the twin coil type. It basically has two electromagnets in it and a carbon throw rod inside, as you can see here. When the electromagnet is charged, it throws it one way, which is already thrown. You reverse the polarity on the electricity and it throws it the other way. Okay? That's the machine's function, is throwing like this. Now there are several ways to connect this to the throw bar on the switch itself. Okay? One way is to connect this to a linkage, such as we have here. This is the linkage itself. We'll just pop it right in there. This has a little arm that extends off of this. All right? This connecting rod, or connecting bar, connects to the switch machine. Now, this switch machine can be mounted underneath the layout on a piece of a block of wood, about 2 inches by 3 inches, underneath like so, or it can be mounted on top of the layout surface beside the switch. If you mount it underneath, it is hidden, and you don't have to camouflage it in any form. There are also another type that has just come into vogue here recently, which mounts the switch machine itself vertically underneath the switch. This is on the market now. It's called a Rix rack. Before, we had used this type of linkage in between the switch machine and the linkage. Okay, now with this vertical type switching, vertical mount on this switch, we're going to use this type. This runs up through here and connects to our linkage like so. We're going to crimp it a little bit with the needle nose pliers so it won't come off, like so. Now we're ready to mount the Rix racks to the underside of the layout surface. Okay, we've already drilled a hole in the middle of the rails. There's a hole in the throw bar there also. We're going to put this up through the layout board. We already have the holes drilled here to mount the Rix racks itself. I'm going to turn this over, go ahead and run the screws through it. Like so. Okay, now our Rix racks is mounted. As before, the switch machine was mounted horizontal to the underside of the layout surface. This one is mounted vertically or at a 90-degree angle to the layout surface. This goes up through the middle of the rails, and when the electric switch machine is activated, throwing this mechanism, it throws this back and forth, thus throwing the points of the switch, aka bending the iron.
This week, we've showed you how to take care of switches if you want to put some in. We've talked about prototype, we've talked about commercial, and we've talked about hand-laying switches. In our next 3 episodes on All About Trains, we'll look at scenery.
By using the illusion concept. We force perspectives, we make the visitor use his imagination. So we want to make it convincing. Why did you choose the Midwest?
Well, mainly because it's rolling and it has flat spots in it and it's easy to lay track on it. And one of the things that I liked about the Midwest
is that with the way I like to look at trains, I like a lot of open expanse where I can have a lot of trains where I can see my cars and everything go by. So that's one of the reasons.
Good.
The other part of it was that there were rivers, which I've already got cut out for, and there were some hills. But one of the unique things that I like is the fact that there are open cuts of hills where the train will come through. So I want to do a section where it'll actually come through but still be exposed, because I like that kind of thing.
Now you've got the right idea, Chuck. It just takes a little imagination, and really it's quite simple to build scenery.
But it must be pretty expensive.
It's really the least expensive. There are no fancy tools required, and the materials are quite easy to find or to buy. Let's see what you have right now.
Well, I've got a sack here, some stuff that I picked up. I've got myself some brown paint. That's going to be my dirt, my earth. I've got some sawdust. Now that's going to be my grass. And I've got some trees. That's what I'm going to use for the...
Well, that's a good start, but we need a few more things. And why don't we take a trip down to the hobby shop tomorrow, and we'll go get the rest of those items.
Oh, okay.
We only take the stuff, Chuck, that it's very hard for us to make ourselves. For instance, ground-up foam that's already been pre-colored.
Well, it's just crushed foam?
That's all it is. It's ground-up foam that's been painted, and there's different grades of it. And a lot of it goes a long way, so you don't really need a whole lot.
Well, how many colors are we going to need?
Well, I always like to pick about 3 different colors. A dark brown, a light brown, a dark green, a light green, and then something else in between. There are several different shades of greens and browns. Like here. Here, for instance, is a yellow grass. See, that's kind of a different. You don't have anything like that.
No, okay.
But it's a mixture. I always like to use different colors because nothing in nature is uniform unless you get some farmer who's got a plowed field. But then it's still not all green. There's yellows and darks and lights mixed in. Good.
All right. Oh, well, don't we need rocks and stuff, too? Pretty expensive rocks, though.
Well, Chuck, I have a secret place where we can get all the rock material that you want for free. So I suggest just set it back very quietly and come on out. Okay, Chuck, we also need some lichen. So a couple of bags ought to do it. And some glue, good old white glue. I better get the large bottle. Let's get the rest of our stuff.
Okay. But, Chief, I thought you said that building scenery was cheap.
Chuck, I said it was inexpensive.
Oh. This is great. I can pick out any size, type, and color that I want.
Just the small stuff, Chuck. Don't get too deep. We want the fine material because that makes the best looking rocks and soil. Why don't we go ahead and get a box full of that stuff? See, that's a nice different color. It'll blend real well with the lighter material that we've already picked up. That's the right kind of consistency. It crumbles real easy. That'll work real well for the scenery on the layout. Well, looks like we've got everything.
Yeah, and I'm ready to start, too, so let's get to it.
Wait, Chuck. Let's start by sketching out what it is we're going to build.
What do you mean sketching out?
Hand me the pen, I'll show you.
Okay.
It's just a very rough guideline, that's all. We'll just go ahead and kind of sketch in the boundary cut.
Never thought of that.
Like that. Let me go around to the front side and get the rest of that road.
Okay, let me try to figure out where I want it. Well, Keith, what I had in mind was just running the road right along the side of the riverbed here and then bringing a curve and coming out and going across the track like...
That's real hard to handle, so let's back it off just a little bit. We'll go ahead and bring it on across.
Well, what am I going to do with all that space?
Well, we can simulate the river bank actually being closer through some scenery techniques. We can put a grove of trees and some bushes right along in here. So we'll just kind of mark this off as the bank area next to the river where there's a lot of bushes. And over here, we're going to put some more hills, not mountains. Remember, this is the Midwest, not the Rocky Mountains. So we'll draw in some more contour lines here.
Well, have we got anything else we need to mark in? Because I'm ready to start.
Well, I've got a pretty good idea of what you want. Let's do it.
Well, what do we do first?
First thing I always do is protect my track.
Okay.
We're going to be slinging a lot of plaster here, and we do not want to have to come back and clean the plaster off the track later. So I just use a strip of masking tape here and just cover the track and the ties. I have the short piece to do.
I'll be through in just a second.
Okay, you got all the ties covered there?
Just about. Yep, that's good. Yep, we got it.
Okay, now that the track is all taped, we are ready to begin forming our basic ground contours. This is done very simply with lumps of newspaper. Just work it with your hands. Don't keep it all the same size. You just crumple them up, tear them into smaller pieces so they're manageable, or if you have a large area, use a larger crumpled up piece of newspaper.
Doesn't look very sturdy.
The sturdiness will come when we put the plaster hard shell on top of that. Some people use screen wire, but I prefer the newspaper. It's not quite as sturdy, but I think it makes a more realistic looking scene.
How do you know when you've got the right shape?
That's very simple. It's when it looks right.
This is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. If it all goes this fast, we'll be finished with all the hills in no time. Can you hand me some more newspapers?
Wait a minute, help me, Chuck. Oh, thank you. Okay, Chuck, we're now ready to begin our hard shell.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, while you're getting some plaster mixed up, I'm going to go ahead and prepare some paper towels.
Okay. You mean I've got to mix this stuff now, Keith?
Yeah, it's just mix equal parts of spackling powder and water to a nice soupy mixture, which you're going to put your paper towels into.
Well, here goes. Here's the spackling powder. Some of the water, let me...
Go ahead and just throw all the water in.
Okay. What is hard shell?
Hard shell is just paper towels soaked in a plaster solution that, when dried, become very hard, take on the shape of our newspaper mounds.
Is this one of the cleanest items that you work with on the...
This is the messiest time of scenery building.
And my wife's going to love the table when I'm done. Okay, I think I've got it mixed.
Okay.
Take some paper towels.
Paper towels will form the basic ground cover. Just get them all, soak them in the plaster nice and soupy-like, and it's fun.
Yeah, right.
And just put it right up on the mountains.
Just any
nice
old...
and even.
This is almost like a, I suppose the easiest way for me to describe the consistency is sort of a thin cream of mushroom soup with grit. Well, now, is that enough for that one, or am I putting too much on that one? Do I need
Go
to...
ahead and cover up, even out the layers here.
Okay.
You don't want any sharp edges here.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I can bring this
That's
up.
fine. Good.
Okay.
So remember, you're doing rolling hills.
Okay, now I can lay this over the end of
Yes.
the... Okay, into my riverbed. Ah.
It's starting to take on the
Yeah,
shape
it does.
of the hill now.
It's a good thing I had the drop cloth down, too. Well, how long do I have to wait before I can do something else on this? Do I have to sit overnight then and let all this
This
dry?
stuff dries in about 30 minutes.
Oh, that's fast.
Okay, let me stick some paper into the river valley here.
Okay, you know...
And what I'll do is you go ahead and drape in a piece of newspaper, a piece of paper towel. This just takes on the basic bank formation here. Okay, so just drape a piece right over into the valley.
Off of both sides?
And pretty soon you'll notice it starts taking on the shape of the river. And press it flat against the board on the bottom, because that's your river bottom.
Okay. Oh, I
One
see.
piece won't make it,
I
so
see.
just use two.
Okay.
There you go. That's it.
Ah, I need another paper towel. Well, that is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Well, now this paper toweling with all this spackling compound and everything, this is going to be pretty...
It will become very hard as a rock. And actually will take paints very nicely, and you can paint it to represent the area that you're familiar with. You may ask yourself, why even bother putting paper in
Yes.
on that cut? Well, the easiest way to look at that is, doesn't that look more natural now?
Yes.
With an irregular bank? Than,
Yeah.
say, if it was just draped over? The newspaper always remains, unless you have a real tall mountain that's more or less hollow on the inside, and then you can take it out.
Okay.
Okay, remember to keep the river bottom flat. You're getting kind of sloppy there.
Okay. Okay.
So you got a lot of wrinkles here that we would have to come back later and take out
Okay.
or cover with the rocky material. But you can now see how this is.
Well, my river bottom's not going to be totally flat, is it?
We'll
I
come
can-
back in, but it's just one less thing we got to worry about.
Okay.
I've never yet seen a wrinkled river bottom.
That's true. Because of the water, it does kind of...
Water tends to keep it nice and smooth.
Yeah.
Plaster is water soluble while it's wet. So when you get a chance, you might want to wipe off
Yes.
the plaster that you've got on top of your bridge here with a little paper towel wet down with water. And there it is, Chuck. That's hard shell. We're now ready to lay on the final coat of pre-mixed joint compound, and this is the fun part. Everything we have been doing up to now has been boring. This is the fun part. And we're not looking for a real thick layer. Just spread it around, because remember, this will act as a glue when we get our secret formula of rocks and earth textures on. It's like icing a cake, except not quite as thick.
Is that pretty much a good way to lay it down, is pretend you're just like icing a cake, just smoothing it off?
That or peanut butter sandwiches. And no jelly, please. Okay, you got a paintbrush?
Yeah, which size do you want?
A fairly wide one.
Let's see, let me give you this then.
Okay, and then you just take it and spread it around. That keeps it from getting too thick, because if it does get too thick, what happens is, as it dries, it'll crack. We don't want that. We also want to be sure and cover up all of the seams from the paper towels. You can see now that what was a very irregular surface here is now smoothing out. The brush marks will be covered up a little bit later with a process called stippling, where we take a paintbrush, paper towel, anything, and just dab the area after it has dried.
Well, now this paper toweling with all this spackling compound and everything, this is going to be pretty...
It will become very hard. Just spread it around, because remember, this will act as a glue.
you want?
A fairly wide one. The brush marks will be covered up a little bit later with a process called stippling, where we take a paintbrush, paper towel, anything, and just dab the area after it has dried, because right now you can see this is picking up and just making like little waves. And then I'll just keep spreading it around. Think you can handle that?
Sure. Does the paintbrush have to be wetted after a while with a...
No, do not wet the paintbrush. That will weaken the plaster, because remember, this is your final coat. Okay, now, once you've got this area covered with a uniform thickness of plaster, you're ready to apply the ground terrain mixture, which is the rocks that we picked up earlier. Okay, it's very simple to do. You just take and sprinkle them on.
Doesn't matter about the size?
Well, watch what happens if I get too big. Yes, it does matter. See, if it's too big, it rolls right off. Okay, the larger stuff falls to the bottom, just like in real life. And you can see this is already starting to look quite realistic. The closer you look at this type of terrain, the more detail you see. Thus, the more realistic it looks.
How am I going to get the loose pieces to stay in?
This will all be fastened down later with a mixture of glue and water.
Well, if I'm going to use glue and water, that's going to change the color of the rocks then, right?
Only while it's wet. White glue will dry clear. You won't see it. Okay, now, what you do after we've done this is remember that there's white plaster underneath this, so don't push into it because it'll cause a white plaster to come out. We will paint that a little bit later. After the plaster is hardened, any place that it's white, we will then paint it. Okay? And just kind of look around, see how it looks. Does it look natural?
Very. To me, it looks a little bit like a rock slide or a...
Right, because remember, this is a fairly steep slope, so there won't be too much hanging on it.
Looks like erosion has already worked into the hill now, the way you've got it down there.
And just go ahead. It goes very fast, as you can see. In fact, you can actually just lay it on just like that. Okay, the big pieces, just pick up and toss into our riverbed for right now. You'll be pushing along quite a big pile of debris, and you can just kind of sort through it.
What, you going to make a boulder? What do you need all the big rocks?
Does it look a little out of place?
Just a hair. Just
Well,
a little bit.
If it looks out of place, take it off. How about this one?
No, a little, yep.
Well, what you can do is push it in place, and then, just like in real life, put some small stuff around it. Okay? In other words, it's now part of the scene. It just wasn't dropped in there out of clear blue sky. And that's the basic concept right there.
Well, let me get started on the rest then. Oops. Got to put a little bit more than I thought. Should I go fairly thick so I'm not going to cut up any of the paper underneath that I've... Well, I've already put some of this down on this one hill, and I kind of started a little light.
Well, the best way to do it is just slop it on there and then use your paintbrush to distribute it.
Okay. Now, is that enough for a working area for me to start? Because I've got...
It will not take you very long to use your paintbrush. Here.
All right.
Spread it around, really nice, easy. Spread it around into a medium thickness. Just a cheap old plastic paintbrush works real good. Remember, what you're trying to do is provide a base for the rocks to be stuck into.
Well, now I've come down off of the hill. Do I get right up, like I'm right next to the roadbed now? So do
Right, just come up to the roadbed, but don't go past it.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why we put the masking tape on the track, because that plaster is real hard to get off.
What about the road? How close can I come to the road?
We will eventually put another layer of plaster over that, so just stay off of it for right now.
Okay.
Okay, once you get it distributed, just continue on.
Okay. Now, is that enough for me to start putting rock down, or do I want to go ahead and...
No, that's fine.
When we dug up the rock, we dug up gray and brown. Can I use intermittent colors, or should I...
Yes.
Okay, so I can...
You may mix and match to your heart's content.
Oh, I'm going to sprinkle some brown.
Oh, come on, Chuck.
First.
Don't be such a pussyfoot.
Just
Take
dump
that
it
thing and just dump it on there. Because you can always go back and brush it off later. Here's the secret.
Okay.
Go through there and pick out all the stuff that doesn't fit.
Oh, that's no problem. I can spot that right off.
And then where we've uncovered some of the plaster, just pat some of the material down a little bit.
Okay.
But see, it goes real fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay?
What's the rule of thumb? Should I try to do the whole area, or as much as I can work with at one time?
This stuff will stay wet for quite a while, so whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay. Okay, so now I can
go
start...
ahead and start on this
All
other
right,
hill
I'll
here.
do the other hill. Well, I just can't believe that...
Don't press too hard on it. Remember,
Okay.
that's hard shell, meaning thin.
All right. It's not made of steel.
No, it's made of plaster. If you need to, go ahead and use a smaller brush to
Okay,
get
because I'm going to have
closer
to
into that hill.
get down into the
Right,
ridges
remember.
here.
Now, keep that side fairly thin, and you can go back with the paper towel and stipple it, because it'd probably be pretty hard to get the rock to stick in there.
Yeah, okay. I haven't had this much fun. This ought to be against the law. This is too much fun. It works. It's pretty easy to move this stuff. I was surprised. I figured it would set up faster than it.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Go ahead and pour the rocks on.
What I was thinking about was doing a light cover over the top and let it fall down into the bottom
That's
of
fine.
it.
Just
And
do it. That's the neat thing about this. If you don't like it, you can just wipe it up and try it again.
Yep, it's a little bit too big.
If you don't like it, you can just wipe it up and start over again.
I'd like to go down and put plaster on the rest of the section I'm working on. Is that all? Can I do that? Well, let's go ahead and finish up the whole section.
Now you've got the right idea.
What a mess I'm making. I'm almost finished with this entire area. Now I'm ready for the rocks. Doesn't look too bad.
Rocks. Hand me the irregularities, please.
Oh, down? How do I keep it from blowing away?
Ah, well, we just take up our good old glue and water mixture and just spray away.
They're not going to see that, huh? It's going to dry.
This is Elmer's glue. It'll dry clear. You can actually do several layers. You can actually do several layers. It will work a lot better.
What do you mean, spray one down, then put something over it?
No, spray it down, let it dry, and then spray again. Several layers is better than one thick one because this rock is water soluble. You want to make sure you don't dissolve it when you spray the glue on. And this will take about 24 hours to dry. Both the glue, the rock, and the plaster.